700,000 plus buys allegedly for UFC 253. That's a quite a large number for a pay-per-view of this caliber. Pat, I want to hear your thoughts on this because I know you have some choice words to say about this reported number.
Yeah, no, I do. So just to lay the groundwork here, I'm not an Adesanya hater. He does some things that annoy me. I will openly admit that I personally don't find funny or like that much, but I do not hate him. I think his skill inside the cage can't be questioned at this point. If you're questioning that, you're out of your mind. But when it comes to 700,000 buys and him being this big star that everybody wants him to be this big star, I get it. We're looking for a new star. We really are. But the numbers don't add up there. They just don't. It's a thing of, first of all, those numbers are coming from a certain source that has essentially, it's been found out that source is just Dana. So I don't truly believe those numbers. The only time I'm going to believe those numbers are when Disney releases in their quarterly earnings, like, hey, a pay-per-view did this much, because they're going to tell their investors because they want them to know. Like they did when McGregor first came back and they announced like, hey, million plus, all of this. Of course, then they're going to be real. But until then, I don't believe Dana for a bit, especially when, UFC 250, that might be the prime example where he was saying they're trending super well. It's doing very, very good. And then the report came out that apparently it was under 100,000. So I, can't trust that source. But even if that number is true, even if it is 700,000 buys, here's the thing. One, we're in a pandemic. Numbers have been up in general. If you take UFC 250 out of it, numbers for pay-per-views have been up in general since we've been in a pandemic. I brought this up with Gaethje and Ferguson. Neither of them tracked well in ratings or other pay-per-view buys, and then they apparently hit around 800,000, which is still more than Adesanya, which we'll get to here in a second. And again, if you're looking at superstar crossover numbers, apparently if we're using these numbers, which we're going to assume these numbers are accurate, or we're at least going to use in terms of being relative to each other, Masvidal versus Usman did 1.3 or 1.4 million, more than double what Adesanya did. And Usman was not the draw there, I can tell you that. So when it comes to him being a crossover star, there's two important things. You can be a star in the sport, and you can be a star that crosses over, or a superstar that really gets casual fans. Adesanya is clearly a star in the sport. That's still a higher, 200,000 pay-per-view buys higher than the reported number of Stipe versus DC, which was a big trilogy, at least within the hardcores. It's still higher in general than a lot of other people have been able to bring in the ESPN Plus era. I mean, COVID ESPN Plus era, it's, again, if you're going against Gaethje and Ferguson, it's actually lower, which isn't that great. But two, beyond all that, if you're comparing it to Masvidal, McGregor, Rousey, Khabib, all those guys, it's one of those things where we haven't seen what Khabib is going to draw with Gaethje, but I'm going to guess that it's more than 700,000. I'm just going to throw it out there. And it's one of those things, like, I get you guys want him to be a star. I get that fans want him to be a star. Media, there's some media out there that really wants to be a star. I get it. He's amazing. He's great in the cage, but he's not there yet. It's simple, clear as day. He's not there yet as that crossover star. He can still get there, but he's simply not there yet.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. Before I throw it to Drake, hit the thumbs up on this video and subscribe to the channel. So Drake, when you heard 700,000, was that a higher number than you were expecting? And do you think that there were any factors, whether it be outside of Adesanya's star power or just that rivalry in general, that brought that many eyes to the screen?
When I saw the number, I thought, seems about right. I really didn't expect this to go over 1 million, despite, all the trends or whatever in the YouTube videos being really good numbers and all that. I don't know. I mean, yeah, it seems like a little bit of promoters going to promote, right? Not propaganda necessarily, but going to promote their guys. Because, of course, yeah, Adesanya, he's definitely a unique personality, a unique fighter in general, has all that potential to be, a real massive star overall in the sporting world instead of just MMA, like Pat was saying. But I don't know. I feel like, people were saying that he was kind of there already, or like right on the cusp, like right before like the Whitaker fight. If you remember, if you go back a couple fights, people were like, damn, this guy is already breaking out. And it was like, I don't know, I don't really feel it. Like obviously among the community, you can hear that a lot more people are talking about it. But on the outside, it's like, I don't know, people still don't really know who this guy is very much, from at least what I was noticing. But on the inside, yeah, it was, people were generating noise and all that, and he was garnering eyeballs and whatnot. But I don't know, I didn't get the feeling, and still even into this one, despite the great rivalry, that helps. Rivalries always help generate buzz, heat between people, drama. Casuals love drama. That's a big thing for them. So I don't know. I think that the number was about right for me, because I think that nobody, especially casuals, probably didn't really know who Paulo was. I mean, as much as impressive as he has been and on the cards, and, you know, the Yoel fight, that was a while ago. You know, people have short-term memory in MMA, especially inside, you know, people who watch consistently, but the casuals, even worse, right? So, yeah, I think that the number was about right. At least from my expectations. Is Adesanya that huge megastar yet? No, not yet. Could he be? Of course, but I think it's a little bit of inflation and, you know, propping him up a little bit before we're actually there.
For sure. And I think that we're also getting close to this area where the potential rivalry, at least for those inside the bubble, they see the Jon Jones back and forth on Twitter, on social media. And that's becoming like this next anticipated thing where Adesanya is looking like the guy in the division that's going to just beat everybody at 185 right now. But I think we're possibly getting close to this area where future pay-per-views may be a little bit hurt when it comes to the buy rate, because it's not Jon Jones. So, Pat, do you think that we're approaching that sort of thing with him? Or do you think that the fact that he goes out there, gets finishes in these marquee fights are still going to keep his buy rates high?
I mean, the interesting part, I'm glad you brought up the Jon Jones, you know, situation, because the interesting thing about Jon Jones is even at his height of popularity, right? He never broke 1 million as far as I know. I think he broke 1 million. Well, I think he broke 1 million once, but even then, I mean, like the DC rematch, which was the real bad blood rivalry that everybody was all like, this is going to be a huge one, only was 800,000 or so. Mm-hmm. And that was pre-ESPN Plus. So you had higher numbers than we have now for sure. But I mean, he has never been on the level of Rousey or McGregor or anything of that nature. He just never has. But when it comes to his last headlining pay-per-view, where under the ESPN Plus banner, which was UFC 239, well, there was 247, but we never really got buy rates for that. But the 239, we actually got some buy rates for an International Fight Week where you had Nunes and you had all these fights. I believe that was around 300K is what was mentioned. So it's one of those things where it's going to be interesting to see what happens if Adesanya keeps winning, because the two main factors you need for superstar buy rates and superstardom in general is you have to be consistently putting on exciting fights and finishes. You have to be dominant, right? And then 2, you have to have that personality. And I think, you know, Adesanya's got the finishes down at this point. I think he's got, you know, the way he took care of Costa. Romero is an oversight. If he has some more of those, that's not going to be great. But I mean, everyone else he's fought, he's pretty much lit up besides Romero and Vettori. So as long as he keeps doing what he did against Costa, he's got that part down. The personality, he's got to find a way to reach that broader audience. Like I've said this before. For example, I watch a lot of the same anime that Adesanya does. That's not super surprising if you look at me. I would assume that you think I do, and you are right. But that being said, some of the jokes he's made, some of the anime references he made, I mean, those aren't mainstream. That culture is growing, right? You have that. I don't know what the appropriate term is, nerd culture, whatever they called it. That's growing a lot, and that's becoming bigger. But it's still not, you know, talk show. You know, like I can go on Conan O'Brien and make anime jokes and people are gonna love it. Like, and it's one of those things. He's got to find a way to connect with that broader audience if he wants to reach that next level. I think he has the finishing and the dominance down. I think now it's either he will find a way to adapt his personality, or he's going to be capped at these 800,000 buys, and it's going to go down because I think, as you mentioned, you know, we're kind of hitting a point where those are going to start decreasing. I think that is going to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think also one thing that we haven't really touched on just yet. I'll ask your opinion on this, Drake. We are in a pandemic, right? So a lot of people are at home. The options aren't there to go out and do more things. Do you think that obviously, I would think that this had to do with a little bit more of the inflated number than what we were all expecting? Assuming things get back to normal for his, maybe his next fight or the fight after that, what does he have to do to, I guess, keep the number at this level, whether it be another interesting rivalry? I don't see one on the horizon, because for this fight, you had the buildup. You had him jumping on top of the cage, flipping off Costa. That built up, that played perfectly into the promo packages. So maybe, you had some people tuning in, be like, oh, wow, I got to see this. Like, there was some real heat right there. Do you think like the personality and, his unfilteredness when it comes to interviews and comments and all that kind of stuff like that will help him, outside of COVID times?
I don't think so. And I kind of came to this realization now, is that I think that the combination of his, and I love a guy who's just being themselves, right? I want people to be themselves, that no gimmicks, let's be real here. And he's a very real guy. But I think that just who he is, his personality might be a little too vulgar and out there, combined with how good of a fighter he is. And that's going to sound weird, right? I think his skill is actually going to hurt him in terms of drawing interest, accompanied by his personality, because he's so skillful and smart in the cage that the casual fans will be like, oh, this fucking asshole, man. I mean, he's winning it. So like, to the trained eye, we're like, this is amazing, man. He's killing it. But they're like, come on, man, go out there, knock his head off right now. Quit waiting around. Like, for example, my mom watched the fight and she was so mad. She was like, this guy is such a jerk, look at him. He waited all the way. Like, she wants to see action and everything. And that's a lot of people who, don't watch fights too regularly, even though she watches more than most. Shout out to my mom. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that that's not as appealing as you look at, for example, we were talking about Ronda and Conor, who are, the biggest stars that we've had, right? Conor, obviously a very outspoken guy, but it's not the same uncensored, kind of style that Izzy presents. And then the way he was winning, his fights were always, pretty wild in some way, right? Like Izzy in these last two weren't really wild fights. Amazing performance, especially this last one, the Romero fight, obviously not a great one. That didn't help. And the Kelvin Gastelum one, his stock was crazy high after that one, because that was one of the best fights you've ever seen. And then as for Ronda, I mean, always ridiculousness in some way, right? And then her personality was, what it was. Obviously not the same as these guys. They all have their own thing and everything. But I just think that the way that it's combined for Izzy and his skill set and how good he is technically, I think it kind of hurts him more than his personality. If he was more of a reckless, kind of crazy guy in the cage, like if he was, let's say he fought like Michelle Pereira, but couldn't lose. Oh my God, he'd be the biggest star of all time easily. There's no doubt about it. Or people would hate him and want to see him lose consistently, which, there's that too. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that he's probably going to be stuck around this, honestly. And I don't see any reason for him to change. Why would he? This is working phenomenally for him as a champion and everything. There's no reason not to change. But I mean, if things just keep going this way, assuming we can make that Jones fight happen, I think that will be huge if things keep trending upward. I mean, obviously Jones is doing his own thing, and who knows? He could lose before that happens. I don't see Izzy really losing anytime soon at the moment, but Jones it could be all on him to make that happen before he gets toppled.
Last thing for me, all great points, by the way. Last thing for me, 700,000 buys. If that is his new ceiling right now, quickly for both of you guys, what does he have to do, or who does he have to fight to break that number?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, it's Khamzat miles, right? Like he's gotta he's just gotta, he beats Khamzat. Well, that's 2 million easy. No, at this point, I think what he has to do, I think Drake nailed it on the head with that combo, right? Like, especially with the way, a huge thing with McGregor and Rousey was always, they might trash talk their opponent, but it was always about them just being as good as they were. Whereas like Izzy really goes after his opponents, really like digs into him, kind of like a Chael Sonnen, which doesn't, it works, but it doesn't translate the same way. I think right now what he has to do is just keep, bragging about himself, keep like touting up how good he is, being that type of thing, like getting that swagger and really showing that swagger off. And I think he has to have massive fights like Jones. I think, if he could pull off the feat of beating Jan or Jones at 205 for the belt and then defending both, I think that would be something. And then he kind of, goes on a ego trip about like, oh, I'm defending both belts, nobody's doing this type of thing. I think that could get some swell behind it. It's got to be something of that nature because, as you pointed out, Matt, there's not anyone there in either division for him where it's going to stand out. Like there's Jones, but other than that, who does he fight where it's that rivalry really pushes him to the next level? And I really can't see it. I mean, I can honestly, I know I was joking about saying Chimaev, but I can honestly see if Chimaev beats Izzy, I could see that actually helping him a lot. That's, but I don't know about the reverse, but it's one of those things like that's pretty much your best option at middleweight right now too, is if he fought Chimaev or obviously Joe. So I don't know. I think that's what he's got to do. He's got to build up how good he is. I think he's got to beat Jones or take the belt at 205 and defend both and just make it all about how great he is. Get that type of swagger going. I think that's the only way he gets higher than what he's doing now.
Drake, any other difference that you see that can get him over 700K?
I mean, I think Pat pretty much nailed it there. I don't have too much to note. I agree with like all of that, man. So well said. But I will say though, it's an interesting point that you say though about how Ronda and Conor were more about themselves and how great they were. Then of course, Conor more than Ronda would, trash the opponents a little bit more, I would say. And then Israel, he does it, more consistently. And then the problem is you look at Conor and Ronda, they were, for the Conor, maybe more than Ronda, but more respectful of their opponents after the fact. And I think that, Adesanya specifically with this Costa fight was still going after him after. And a lot of people don't like that, even, that's kind of the thing I was saying to casuals. They'll be like, all right, this guy was cool until he did that, man. You won the fight. You don't need to still be a dick afterwards. So I think that kind of hurts. Maybe like, I wonder how reactions to him would be if he just was kind of, all cool about it afterwards, cut things off. Of course, this was a rivalry fight and everything, but I don't know. It makes you wonder if he just stopped it there, on to the next thing. Right. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think we're at a point, at least for the near future, within the next year. So he's just going to go out there and just fight guys, add to that, keep building the resume up. He wants to knock off that Anderson Silva record. So I think we're just going to see that pay-per-view buys going to drop down a little bit. I think. Depending on the opponent, maybe, some 2 title fight cards are in his future as well, with somebody else to help carry the bill. But we'll see how it goes, man. Everybody watching, comment below with who you think, should be the next opponent for Adesanya and who would, help him get over that 700K mark. Let us know below.